Hello students, welcome to Module 2. Here we're going to look at CVP Analysis. CVP Analysis stands for Cost, Volume, Profit Analysis. This is going to pick up on a lot of the concepts we did in Module 1, so you want to make sure that you're familiar with variable costs versus fixed costs. We did talk a little bit about this format of the income statement in the last video. This is how we're going to set up our business. We're going to break our costs into the variable cost and the fixed cost. This is going to allow us to figure out what would happen if we changed the volume, if our costs change, and everything else being equal in terms of the reputation and the societal effect. We're looking at maximizing our operating income. That is our goal, and so we're going to see how best to do that in this video. So you have four components of a CVP income statement. There's basically four variables that go into putting this together, and you see those on the top part of your screen there. So let's take the place of a physical therapy business. They have revenue per patient of $500. The variable cost per patient is $300, so that would be the test that each patient needs, the physical therapist that each patient needs. Those costs go up as the patients come in. You have the fixed costs for each month of $200,000. That would be the rent. That would be the office manager's salary. And then you also need to know the units. In this case, it's patients seen. If you have these four pieces, let me just say that again, revenue per patient, variable cost per patient, the fixed cost, and the units, then you can put a CVP income statement together. So pause the video for just a minute, see if you can put that together and see what the operating income for this month would be. When you put that together, this is what it's going to look like. So as we said, here are your per unit values, sales of 500, variable cost of 300. I need to make sure that my units, which was 1600, are both the same for the sales and variable cost. It's very important that your units always be consistent with your sales and the variable costs because your variable costs change with the units. If I have an extra sales unit, I have an extra variable cost unit as well. So once I put this together, I have $320,000 of contribution margin. As you see on your screen, your contribution margin shows how much of sales remain after variable costs are deducted. That is not our profit. I need to first cover my fixed costs, and then anything left over is going to be my operating income. So there is our CVP income statement set up. If I wanted to look at contribution margin ratio and ask the question, what is the percentage of a sales dollar that remains after variable costs are deducted? Well, contribution margin was $200 per unit. I would just take that 200, I would divide by the 500, and I have a contribution margin ratio of 40%. We're going to use that ratio in problems as we go forward. So just as a recap, your contribution margin can be stated on a per unit basis, or you can express a contribution margin percentage there. One of the things we can do with this CVP analysis is figure out our break-even point. Now, we want to make money, but we would much rather break even than lose money. So we might ask the question, how many units do I need to sell in order to break even? The break-even point is just the units that are needed in order to have zero profit. And in order to have zero profit, my sales have to cover all of my costs. So there's my two pieces, the variable cost and the fixed cost. I could put this formula together and figure out my units needed in order to reach that zero break-even. But let's do that in the context of a shoe business. Rogers Apparel sells athletic shoes for $90. So 90 is going to be my sales price per unit. The variable cost for a pair of shoes is $50. There's my variable cost per unit. The fixed cost average $20,000 per year, and I need to know how many units I need to sell in order to have a profit of zero, aka break even. So if I set this up, there is the way that it would look. 90x, so $90 times the units that are sold, minus the $50 variable cost times the units that are sold, minus the $20,000 in fixed costs must be zero. That's how I set my formula up. I do a little algebra. I combine these there. So there's 40, which is my contribution margin per unit, right? Think about this up here. The $90 is the sales price. The $50 is the variable cost. I'm making $40 of contribution margin per unit, and I'm going to move my 20 over to the other side. I solve for X, and I need to sell 500 units in order to break even. Now I could put all this together, and if you like doing it that way, that's perfectly fine. But you could look at this line right here, and you could see that there is a shortcut to solve for your break even point. That would be your fixed cost divided by your contribution margin per unit. My fixed cost was $20,000 and 40 is my contribution margin per unit. I'm basically making $40 to the good for every pair of shoes that I sell. I need to sell enough shoes in order to cover those fixed costs. So one pair of shoes that I sold, I got $40. Two pair of shoes, I got $80. I got to keep going until I cover my $20,000 of fixed cost, and I need 500 pairs of shoes in order to do that. I could also use this in order to solve for the amount of dollars that I need in order to break even. If I wanted to, I could solve for my units first and then multiply by the sales price of 90. But there's also a shortcut going back to the contribution margin ratio that we talked about before. I was making 44.44 cents on the dollar of contribution margin for every sales dollar. I could take my fixed cost, divide by that contribution margin ratio, and I have that same $45,000 for my break-even sales. So the contribution margin ratio is going to come in when I'm solving for dollars. The contribution margin per unit would be used if I was solving for break-even units. Now, I imagine you guys, if you're running a business, don't want to just break even. You want to make a profit. So I can use this CVP analysis to determine how many units I need for a target profit. So let's say the CEO wants an annual profit of $4,000. So now, instead of 0 over here, I'm going to put 4,000 for the profit. Solve it exactly the same way, and it makes sense that I would need more units than the 500 that I needed to break even. I now need 600 units in order to reach a profit of $4,000. Is there a shortcut? Yes, there is. Going back to what we did before, look at that line right there. What is the 24 that you see right there? That 24 is the fixed cost plus the target profit. Here's a shortcut for you in order to determine your units to reach your target profit. Take your fixed cost, add that target profit to it, and then divide by that same contribution margin per unit. 24,000 divided by 40 gives us the 600 units that I need. Same as before, I could use this to determine my sales dollar. I could calculate my units first, multiply by the 90, and I need 54,000 of sales in order to reach that profit. But I have my shortcut. Again, I'm going to use that contribution margin ratio. So 0.444 is my ratio as we already calculated. And I divide the fixed cost plus the target profit by that contribution margin ratio. And I have 54,000 as my sales that are needed in order to reach my 4,000 of profit. Okay, so be ready for some basic questions on break-even and target profit, both for the units and for the sales dollars that you would need in order to get there. Let's talk about scenario analysis. So if we kept our previous slide where I sold 600 units, and this is going to be my status quo for this shoe dealer, there was my CVP income statement at 600 units of activity. Scenario analysis is going to allow us to change the variables up. Let's say we're a business and we're going to try to maximize our profit. There are certain things that we can do in order to try to maximize that income. Remember, there were 4 pieces of data in the CVP analysis. There was the sales price, the variable cost per the unit, the fixed cost, and the units. In the slides that follow, we're going to be looking at different scenarios where those 4 pieces change, and I just need to roll them through the CVP income statement and see whether or not my profit changes from $4,000. If it goes up, then that would be a good initiative. If it goes down, it would be a bad initiative. So let's look at an example here where management decides, well, maybe we're making shoes that are too high end. If we made cheaper shoes, the company could save $3 per unit. Remember that the cost of the shoes is a variable cost. So I could buy cheaper shoes and save $3 on the variable cost, but customers are going to notice. If I do this, I'm going to lose 5% of my sales. The question is, would this be a good decision or not? So what are the pieces that are going to change? Your variable cost per unit is going to change, as is your units that are sold, which affects your sales and your variable cost. So see if you can put that together, put a new CVP income statement together, given those new variables, and see where you end up. This is what you would see. The 600 units is going to go down by 5% to the 570. So I'm going to use the 570 times the 90 for my new sales. I have a new variable cost per unit of 47 because that went down by 3. Multiply that by 570. and I got 26,790, and fixed costs don't change. There's 20,000 there, there's 20,000 there, so I subtract, and my new operating income is 4,510. Good initiative or not? Although the business sold 30 fewer units, the contribution margin was greater. So there you go, 24,000 up on the top, 24,510. Since fixed costs are the same, I could just look at that line right there, and operating income is up by 510. That would be a good initiative. Basically what happened was, even though I sold fewer units, I was making more contribution margin per unit, and so that had a greater effect, and alternative one would be a good initiative for the business to do. Let's look at another one. What if I increase fixed cost and as a result increase my sales volume? One way that I could do that is a $10,000 advertising campaign. I'm going to take out ads online or on the radio. I'm going to spend $10,000 on that. And as a result, my sales units are going to go up by 25%. So what is actually going to change? The fixed costs are going to change. The units are going to change. The 90 and the 50 are going to stay the same. Pause the video here, see if you can put together a new CVP income statement given those changes in those variables. Once you do that, your units are going to increase to 750. That is a 25% increase from before. The 90 and the 50, as we said, stays the same, but I have a 10,000 increase in fixed cost. That was the cost that I had to pay for the advertising. As a result, yes, this went up. The 30,000 is now my contribution margin. It was only 24 before, but that extra fixed cost was a big deal. So that extra fixed cost more than ate away my increase in the contribution margin. I'm left with a zero profit now. I was making 4 before, so now I'm 4,000 worse off. Not good. So although we increased our units that were sold, we have an extra 6,000 of contribution margin. The 10,000 extra fixed costs were greater than that. As a result, 4,000 is my loss from this initiative. I would not want to do alternative 2. The answer to that would be a big no. One more, alternative 3. Increase the selling price and decrease the sales volume. So price goes up, the customers are not going to want to buy as many of our shoes, but maybe I'm better, maybe I'm not. If the sales price increases to $100, management estimates that 6% fewer units are going to be sold. So again, there's your status quo. Pause the video and see if you can put the CVP income statement together with the new sales price and the new volume. Once I do that, the units are going to be 564. That is a 6% decline in units from the 600. My sales is greater, 100 per unit. Fixed cost stays the same, variable cost stays the same. Are we better or are we worse off? We're actually better. So we went from 4,000 of profit to 8,200 of profit. 4,200 is our increase right there. As a result, you would want to do this initiative. Even though you lost some units, you went from making a contribution margin of 40 to a contribution margin of 50. Therefore, it netted out where you were actually making more money. Alternative 3 would be a good initiative to do. So there's all kinds of problems that you could do here. Those are just 3. You'll see some on the homework. All you're doing is changing those 4 variables up and seeing whether or not you're making more or less money. Okay, as we wrap up the video, let's look at segment elimination and expansion. Let's take Home State Bank. They have 2 segments to their division here. They have the safety deposit box service and the regular bank operations. They've done the data. The safety deposit box is losing money. They're considering eliminating that service. So here's the breakout of their data. They have the traditional bank operations on the left, the safety deposit box on the right, and they also have 12,000 of common fixed costs like the rent for the building or the bank manager's salary. They're looking at the safety deposit box segment margin of 9,000 and they're saying, why are we keeping this service? It's costing us money. Maybe we should eliminate it. Well, what would happen to the overall business if they eliminated the safety deposit box? Pause the video for a second, figure out what the total profit would be. Well, here's what they would have. You still have the sales and the variable cost from the bank operations. You still have the bank operations fixed cost. You still have the common fixed costs. But I don't have that 9,000 loss that the safety deposit box was incurring. And so my profit has gone from a 6 to a 15. It is up $9,000. And if this were the outcome, then I would want to eliminate that safety deposit box service. Well, pause here for a second. I wonder if it's a little bit more complicated than that. What if there are customers in the traditional bank operations who are doing business with us because they really like the safety deposit box service? If I get rid of the safety deposit box, maybe they're going to go to another bank that has that, and perhaps the traditional bank operations would be affected if I got rid of the safety deposit box service. Now let's assume that if I do get rid of that safety deposit box, 20% of my traditional customers are going to leave. Now this actually might change the math in our decision here. So here's the existing status quo of the bank operations. This is going to change when those customers leave. I'm going to eliminate the safety deposit box, but what happens to the $6,000 profit that I'm currently earning if 20% of my customers leave from the bank operations service? Do the math, pause the video for a second, see if you can figure that out. Well, here is where I would be after if I eliminated the safety deposit box service and lost 20% of my customers from the bank operations. This entire top part, the sales, the variable costs, and the contribution margin, that goes down by 20%. The fixed costs stay, the common fixed costs stay. Well, now, instead of a $6,000 profit, I'm at a $1,500 loss. Eliminating that safety deposit box service turns out to be a bad idea. Even though I saved myself the $9,000 loss that the safety deposit box was incurring, a lot of the profit that the bank operations was bringing in is now gone because those customers have left. If this is the situation, I would not want to eliminate the safety deposit box. Final thing here for you about expansion. Let's say that you're a pizzeria and you currently operate a store. You can see that on the left, there's store number one's data. This is the current segment margin that store is bringing in. You're thinking about opening a second store across town, okay? And you've done the data, you estimated what the sales and the costs are going to be, and store number two is going to bring in $40,000 of profit once that store is open. The question is, should you open store number two? Well, possibly my new profit is going to be $110,000, but as you likely have thought, what if store number two eats into the customers of store number one? Some of the customers who initially went to store number one and helped us make that $70,000 of margin for store number one are now going to store number two. Perhaps store number one is negatively affected with the opening of store number two. So let's make an assumption that if store number two is opened, sales at the first store are projected to be cut by half. Now rerun the data, figure out what your new profit would be. You're going to have fewer sales, fewer variable cost, and lower contribution margin for store number one. See if you can determine what that would be. Well, here's where you're going to end up. All these numbers right here are half of what store number one brought in initially. So as a result of losing those customers, now store number one is making a margin of 10. Store number two did make the 40 that we projected, but store number one is significantly down. Now I'm bringing in $50,000 from two stores where I was making $70,000 from one store. Since there was such a negative effect on store number one, we would not actually want to open store number two. We're better just operating that one store. So in this video, we did a lot of different types of analysis. We did scenario analysis where we tweaked the different sales price, the units, the variable cost, the fixed cost. Those are the types of tools that CVP analysis allows you to do. Big picture, we're trying to maximize our profit and figuring out the effects of these strategies on that bottom line. Okay, we'll see you in the discussion.